Hey everyone, welcome back to Practical AutoCAD and Inventor. If you're getting ready for the Autodesk Inventor Certified User Exam, then you need to master a key skill, projecting sketch geometry. Projecting geometry is essential when working with complex sketches, referencing existing features, and ensuring design accuracy. In this video, I'll show you how to use the Project Geometry tool, why it's important, and how to apply it in real-world settings. By the end of the tutorial, you'll have a solid understanding of how to use projected geometry to improve your sketches, making your workflow smoother and more efficient. So let's get started. Projecting geometry in Autodesk Inventor allows the designer to reuse information rather than creating information from scratch every single time. If I use projected geometry from existing faces in a new sketch, if the existing geometry changes, then my new sketch will automatically adapt and update to reflect those changes. So let's start by looking at how to include geometry in a new sketch. I'm going to go to the File tab up here and choose New and create a new part just to have something to begin with. I'll right-click my mouse using the marking menu to choose a new sketch, and I'll start working on the XY plane. Now, as a default, you'll notice down here that the origin point, okay, this point right here, is already included in my sketch geometry. If I go over to the history browser over here on the left and I click on the plus next to the origin folder, you'll see I have a binary tree, and it has 6 or 7 different actual items in here. It has the YZ plane, the XZ plane, the XY plane, the X-axis, the Y-axis, the Z-axis, and the center point. The center point is something that's important to have in all of your sketches because it makes it very easy to locate your geometry in association with a known point in space. If I were to come in here and make a window around that center point and then hit the delete key, you'll notice now that my center point is no longer included in this sketch geometry. And so I don't have anything to orient my geometry with that 0, 0. So if that happens to you, if your center point is no longer included in sketch geometry because you've deleted it or some reason like that, you'll want to go on the Sketch tab, you'll go to the Create panel, and you'll choose Project Geometry. After you choose Project Geometry, you'll make your way over here and you'll simply click on Center Point, and you'll notice that it brings that center point back into your geometry or into your sketch, so that now when I come in and let's say I wanted to make a rectangle in this sketch, I could easily come in now and say, okay, from that corner to my center point, it's 0.25, and in this case, I could come in here and say, 0.125. So now I have located the start point, or the lower left-hand corner of that rectangle with its relationship to that center point. Now, other reasons you might want to use sketch geometry include maybe you're going to draw something that is symmetrical about an axis. So, for example, if I go to this truck wheel, and I expand my origin here, you'll notice that the Z-axis goes right through the center of that truck wheel, okay? And so when you have something like this that's going to be a revolution around an axis, what you may want to do is project that axis as a center line into your sketch. And that's just what I did in this model. So if I come here to Sketch 1 and activate it, you'll notice that I've got my geometry in here and it's fully constrained and fully dimensioned. But the very first thing that I did was I projected that Z-axis as a center line. Now, going back to my original sketch here, let me just get rid of this geometry. Okay, so again, I've deleted all that geometry. I accidentally, or maybe on purpose, deleted that center point. So again, I will go to Project Geometry, and I will bring that center point back into my drawing. Now, if I want this x-axis in this case to be like a center line, what you do is you come over here to the Format panel, and you're going to click on the center line button in the Format panel, and then don't draw a line, but just go to Project Geometry, and in this case I will pick the x-axis, and you'll see that it imports that x-axis as a center line. So I don't have to dimension it. It knows exactly where the center line is at all times, and there's no need to dimension it. In fact, if you look down here, you'll see it says on the status bar that it is fully constrained, but it does not need to be dimensioned. From here, I could turn off that center line geometry, and I could draw in my, my geometry, whatever it happens to look like. I'm just going to put some geometry in here and probably not fully constrain it, just so that we can get this done with a little bit faster here. Okay, so now I've got my geometry in there. After I get all of my constraints and dimensions on there, I could say finish that sketch, and when I come in here to revolve, notice that it's going to recognize that center line as the center line for my axis and allow me to complete that revolution. So the second reason there to import geometry into a sketch is maybe it's going to be a center line or something else. Now, a third reason that I may want to import sketch geometry is I've got something that is going to change and adapt. So let me go to this part, for example. Maybe on the back side over here, I need a couple of holes on this surface. Now, something special about this surface, if I look at it from the side view, it's not a vertical surface. It's not aligned with any of these origin surfaces. Okay, so my first step here would be to create my new sketch surface. So I would right-click my mouse using the marking menu, say I want a new sketch. And rather than choosing one of the original origin planes, I'm going to say I want to use that plane right there. Now when I do so, you'll see that it brings an origin point into the drawing. It may or may not be the same origin point that is here. It happens to be in this case, and you can see that it is because if I hover over it over here in the history browser, it actually highlights it and it says, okay, it is the same point. But if I wanted a couple of holes here and here that were a certain distance away from the edges, what I would want to do is project those edges into the drawing as maybe construction geometry. So to do that, again, on the Format panel over here, I'm going to project, or I'm going to change the format to construction geometry. And then what I'll do is I'll say, let's project that geometry. And I don't want the whole surface. I'm just going to pick that one edge there and that one edge there. And you can see what it does is it brings those two lines into the sketch as construction geometry. Now the advantage of construction geometry is that it does not have to, it will be ignored for the purposes of profiles. So if I'm doing an extrusion or a revolution or something like that, those types of features will ignore this construction geometry, but I can still dimension to it. Now, if you look at my sketch down here on the status bar, you'll see that it still says that it's fully constrained. And it's fully constrained because this geometry, even though it's yellow, it's not, normally that color is not the fully constrained color. This geometry is dependent upon other features that already exist that are fully constrained. So that's why it's showing there. Now, in this case, I wanted to add a couple of points in here. So I'll add a couple of points into this drawing. I will give them a horizontal relationship. And then I will add a couple of dimensions on here. So I'll say I want, let's say I want this dimension to be, oops, I don't want to pick the corner there. So I'll pick from there to there, and I'll make this 1/4 of an inch. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll say from that line to there. It's also going to be that same 1/4 of an inch. And then let's just say, so that I have it fully constrained, I want that to be 3/4 of an inch. So now I've located the centers of those two holes 1/4 of an inch in from each edge. When I choose Finish, I can now come in here and I can put my holes in, and I'm going to say, okay, let's make those threaded holes, and I'll make them, say, 1/4 inch So let's see, come down here and I'll say a 1/4 inch, 0.25, where are we? Quarter inch. So 1/4 20, and I'm just going to make them 1/2 inch deep. I don't want it to go through all, so I'll give it a total depth of 0.5 and say OK. So now I've added those 2 holes to that back depth. Now again, earlier I said the importance of including sketch geometry is if my part changes, these features will change as well. So what I did was, remember, when I created that sketch, I included that edge right there and that edge right there in the sketch, and then I dimensioned the center of the hole based on where it is from that edge. So it makes sense that if I come back in here and I change that extrusion, and that extrusion right now is 1.15, but if I were to change it to say 2 just to make it extreme and say OK, notice now that even though the overall depth of this extrusion has changed, it's still a 1/4 of an inch from the edge to that hole and a 1/4 of an inch from the edge to the center of that hole. So as my part updates, it takes along with it that information. Okay, if I undo that, you'll see how it goes back. It's still now a 1/4 of an inch over and a 1/4 of an inch over. Now the last thing that you may want to do is to create a sketch where it has sliced geometry, and I can do that one in here as well. I'm going to say right click, I'm going to create a new sketch, and then on this time I'm going to use that XY plane again, so I'll just pick that XY plane. If I rotate back up and look at this, and I'll just hover over that XY plane, you'll see that it's right in the middle of this part. And if I want that geometry where my part actually cuts that, I can include that geometry as well. So looking at this, the first thing that I'll do is I'll press F7, which is slice geometry. And so now if I press F7, you'll see what it does is it slices it in half. It gets rid of that front half, if you will, and then it allows me to see the back half. And if I want to capture this geometry that is along that cutting plane line, instead of using project geometry, I will come in here and I'll say project cut edges. And you'll see what happens right off the bat is it includes all of those cut edges as part of my sketch. And again, if you look on the status bar down here, it is fully constrained because this object is already fully constrained in my other sketches, and where this geometry is placed in this sketch is dependent upon those. So then I could come in and add additional geometry and base it on there. That way, I'm not just starting from scratch, but again, I'm reusing that geometry that's already been defined in my sketch. So whether you're creating a sketch from scratch and wanting to project a center line, or you're projecting something that exists already, or you're even cutting something in half and looking at it through the middle, there are a few different ways to get that information. Again, project geometry and project cut edges.